Actor Rob Schneider says there is a rot in the soul of Hollywood. Pretty bold statement. Let's see what he had to say.
But I remember him being a really good American, loving America. And I remember him, this is a guy who marched with Martin Luther King early, like 1961, before it was, cause celebre. I mean, with Marlon Brando. These guys realized where the country needed to go. So we need to have, equal rights. We needed to have a society that didn't judge people based on the color of their skin. And he was there. And then years later, just rejected by the liberal intelligentsia because he just happened to be a conservative. And I think that's shameful. I think that's a rot in the soul of Hollywood. And I think today's blacklisting of conservatives is the same thing. I think it's, at its core, it is adding to its destruction. And I think we are seeing Hollywood completely dismantle itself.
I'm joined today by CBN's Raj Nair. Now, there's a lot to talk about here. We're obviously in a holiday week still, and this interview stuck out to me because you have this actor who has achieved a ton of success talking about how there's really only a one-mindedness in Hollywood, that people like Mark Ruffalo, another actor, he can speak out, he can support Democratic candidates, liberal candidates, and this goes for both faith and politics, right? But yet, if somebody like Rob Schneider speaks up and says, hey, I support Donald Trump or I support some other person, they then find themselves on the chopping block, potentially not able to get work. This is interesting. It's something we've known about for a long time, Raj, but to see people like Rob Schneider step forward and talk about it so openly, it's kind of interesting, is it not?
It is. And I think there's actually a lot of exciting and hopeful trends. I think of the fact that, and not to belittle Christian films in the past, but I think Christian films in general are getting a lot better. I took my family to go see David in theaters. I'm like, okay, this is going to be kind of like a subpar animated film. And I'm like, whoa, this was awesome. So there's definitely that. But I also think one of the things that Rob said that I found really interesting, he said, listen, some of these studios, that are located in Hollywood and around LA, they're just going to be open lots. They're going to be real estate here in the next few years because it's just not needed. You can think about the diversification of the film industry. There's a huge film industry happening in Atlanta, places like Cleveland. And then also just, you don't need these like $gajillion budgets to make films that are good anymore. People making them, for much less and being more creative. And so I think the grip, the monopoly that Hollywood has had, specifically Hollywood has had on what culture is lessening. And I think Rob pointing out that there is this kind of rot, I think actually almost, I think maybe it's too rotted. Obviously, not obviously, but if I've talked about this. I've spent a lot of time in Hollywood. I've worked in Hollywood. And it is kind of an echo chamber, to say the least. And so the fact that there is cracks in the seams of the domination and the singularity of the film industry is a good thing. And the fact that you have people like Rob Schneider and others from the mainstream that are like, yeah, I'm good. Let's at least have the ability to think critically. And so I think a lot of people that were kind of more, if you want to call it mainstream liberal, are like, whoa, what is this? This isn't liberty at all. And so to me, Billy, there's actually a lot of exciting trends in the film industry. And again, just to go back to David, the explicitly Christian film industry has now, in my opinion, reached the level of the mainstream animations, the Pixars of the world. And so we're definitely headed in a very exciting direction.
Yeah, a couple of things to respond to what you said here. He was specifically, when he talked about the rot, the exact quote was, I think that's a rot in the soul of Hollywood. He then went on to say there's a difference between when liberal actors speak out or conservative actors. Again, we've seen this in the faith space. What you're speaking about, I think, is really interesting because he's talking about internal metrics of Hollywood, internal politics of Hollywood, but it translated into, as you were saying, the culture, how Hollywood treated the general culture, how it has treated Christian culture. Well, guess what? If Hollywood wants to create a super secular culture and they're doing that through their content, you now have Christian storytellers, to your point, who are stepping up to the plate, doing an incredible job, and they're competing. I mean, David broke records. I believe it was 22 million opening weekend. It was the biggest opening weekend for a faith-based animated feature ever, I believe, in movie theaters. So we're watching these things happen, not just in animation, across the board, where Christians are stepping into Hollywood storytelling. And I think Hollywood is actually being put, forced up against a wall. And people are saying, look, there's more than one opinion in American culture, right? There's more than one opinion. And in fact, the majority of Americans call themselves Christians. Whether or not they actually are is another debate and story. But why is Christianity being ignored or not given proper framing? Well, guess what? Now it is. People are stepping up. And I think we're seeing people like Rob Schneider and others get bolder and be more willing to say, hey, you know what? We've experienced that there's something not equal here. And by the way, let me just add this. Whether you're a conservative or a liberal, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, the idea that ideas are so dangerous that they should not be allowed in, that is a real problem, because not only does it hurt the people whose ideas are rejected, if you're a liberal on a college campus, let's say, and you're not allowing conservative perspective, you're never being challenged. Your thoughts are never being challenged to refine what you actually believe. So this becomes a danger, not just for those being iced out, but also for those whose ideas are never, ever being challenged.